iPhones can take amazing video if you know the settings and the strategies to get the most out of this tool, but it does not have to be complicated. So in today's video, I'm sharing my professional tips on iPhone video and a complete guide to filming video with your iPhone. My name is Annabelle Needles, and I'm a habitual wonder seeker, as well as the video editor behind Evergreen Productions. I'm here to help fellow memory makers get off their phones and into their lives. And yes, this video is all about being on your phone, but I think that the more comfortable you feel with using your iPhone as a tool, the less extra time you'll have to spend staring at it. So you'll already know exactly how to capture what you need, and then for the rest of the time, you can just enjoy the moment. Let's jump right in with first looking at the settings on your iPhone to make sure that they're set up in the best way to take great video. And we're gonna go into the settings app on your phone and then scroll down to the camera section. And I'm just gonna go down these one by one. First, I do like to turn on the grid element. I find that it helps me to compose better shots. It basically just creates a 3x3 grid on your screen so that you can tell where center is, and this is based on the photographer's rule of thirds. I feel like having the grid on makes it really easy and quick for me to line up shots. I don't have to spend a lot of time second guessing myself. In the record video section, make sure you're recording at least 1080p, which is HD. Now, these numbers are just referring to the number of pixels on the short end of the video rectangle. So the higher that number is, the more data you're capturing in your video. It's a higher resolution, so the video is going to turn out clearer, and you're going to be able to watch it in a larger format. If you have an iPhone with lots of space, or you regularly run backups and dump your photo and video footage like I suggested in this video, which you could go back and watch if you want to see my method for how I keep my media organized. If you have a lot of space, you can shoot in 4K, which will give you the highest possible video quality. Often, I find that 1080 is sufficient, but 4K definitely gives you the most flexibility. All right, in this section, you're also going to see numbers with FPS after them. That stands for frames per second. Now remember the history of video, and video is basically just a bunch of still pictures flashing in front of your eye really fast. And so frames per second tells you how many still photos, essentially, are in 1 second of video. The higher the frames per second, the more smooth your video will look. 24 frames per second is kind of the cinema standard, so like movies, but if you're gonna do any slow motion, like slowing videos down in your editing software, you're definitely going to want to record at 60 frames per second. And that's because if you have a video file that's 60 frames per second and you slow it down to say 50%, then you're going to end up with 30 frames per second, which is still a perfect and smooth video. But if you have 24 frames per second in your raw video file and then you slow it down by 50%, you're only going to have 12 frames per second, which means that your video is going to start kind of looking a little choppy and almost like a GIF. There's going to be too much space in between each individual photo for your brain to fill in that gap and create a smooth looking video. Personally, I like to shoot at 60 frames per second because it gives me the most flexibility later. All right, this lock camera setting basically just controls whether or not your camera can switch from one lens to another while you're filming. So iPhones actually have two lenses, and there's a wide angle, there's a telephoto. Occasionally, if you're like zooming in a video, for example, it might switch between those two lenses and create a little fluttering effect. It's a good feature to kind of just enable so that you can avoid any potential problems. Personally, I don't mess with the slow-mo settings on my phone. I very rarely actually use the slow-mo function on my phone. I'd rather have the flexibility to do it myself in editing and control exactly how it looks. But if you're going to use the slow-mo function on your phone, make sure it's in at least 1080p so that it matches the other video that you're taking and it's the same size, so when you pull it into your editing software, you don't have to blow it up and make it more fuzzy. Stereo sound. Now this is on by default, and it just means that you're recording in two audio channels. So just think of it like the two earbuds on your headphones. You have a right channel and a left channel. I don't know what's left and right, obviously. And if you're recording in stereo, you have audio recording for this side and audio recording for this side. If you turn that off and you record in mono, you're only gonna have one audio channel, so you might only hear it in one ear. Now I filmed a whole video about recording audio with your iPhone iPhone. So if you want to check that out, I'll put it right up here. Moving on to formats. Again, if you're going to be using an editing software or if you're going to be putting your video on a non-Apple device, I definitely suggest using the most compatible setting here. This is going to mean that your videos are recording in MP4 format, and that's readable across any device. When you use high efficiency, that's going to create a .heic file. That's Apple's high efficiency file format. And if you're gonna put it in an editing software or send it to somebody who's not on an Apple, you're probably gonna have to convert that video in QuickTime in order to be able to do that. And I'm always trying to avoid extra steps, so if at all possible, I like to use the most compatible. There's some video settings on the iPhone. For example, if you're shooting 4K at 60 frames per second, you're gonna have to use the high efficiency format and convert it later. So just keep that in mind when you're deciding what resolution and what frames per second you're going to be shooting your video on. All right. Now that we've got the settings sorted, let's move on to filming. Now, I always like to start by mentioning that you should hold your camera horizontally and not vertically. Vertical is basically only good for Instagram stories, IGTV, that world. If you want your video to live other places like computer, TV, YouTube, Facebook, you're going to want to shoot horizontal. Now let's talk about zoom. It is really important if you want to get good video from your iPhone not to zoom past the point of optical zoom. If you see there's a little circle on the screen, if you tap it once, it zooms into 2x. You tap it back, it zooms out to 1x. You can also just use your fingers to pinch and zoom further and go up to 6x. Anything beyond 2x is going to go into what's called digital zoom as opposed to optical zoom. So optical zoom is a feature of your lens, the capacity of your lens, and digital zoom is basically like computer generated. So it's going to be a lot more pixelated, it's going to be a lot shakier, and generally speaking, it's like not great to watch. It really stands out when you try to compare that footage and put it next to other footage that you've taken. So I definitely say try to avoid zoom at all costs, especially digital zoom. Stick to the optical zoom capacity of your lens. Also, the more that you zoom, the shakier your footage is going to be. So try not to use zoom a lot unless you have some kind of stabilization device, which I will cover in a second. When you're recording and you have your camera open on your phone, you can tap the screen and it will create a little yellow box. This box is what controls the focus and the exposure settings of your video. And you can tap anywhere on your screen and you can see how the exposure changes based on where you have the little yellow box. If you tap and hold on the screen, the box will flash a little bit and then it will pop up notice that says that you've locked your focus and your exposure. What this means is that no matter where you move your camera, the exposure is not going to automatically adjust, the focus is not going to change, and that can be really helpful if you are panning or maybe you are doing a time lapse of a sunset. Instead of having your camera constantly adjusting to the new light, which can create some weird things in the time lapse, that's happened to me before, you'll get a very smooth transition and it just looks more seamless. Now once you have that little box on the screen, you can tap on the sun and drag the sun up and down, and that will make your video brighter or darker. And this can be really helpful if you want the camera to say focus on your face, but you are maybe standing in front of a sunset or in front of the ocean, and so the background is a really different exposure level. So if you tap on your face, maybe the background gets totally blown out and you can't see it, but if you tap on the background, then you're kind of blurry and dark. So you can use that sun to kind of fine-tune your exposure settings. Then once you're done with that scene, that clip, you can just tap on the screen and that will unlock your focus and your exposure and just go back to the automatic settings. Okay, let's talk stabilization. If you have the option, I definitely recommend investing in a tripod or a gimbal. I'll list my two favorites, the ones that I personally use, below in the description box of this video. And what a gimbal does basically is it has a motor in it that counterbalances the weight of your phone with the movement of your hand. So it eliminates a lot of shakiness, a lot of sudden movements, and it really smooths out your video footage and makes a huge difference. Now, if you don't have access to a tripod or a gimbal, that's okay. But you'll just have to be a little bit more aware of your environment and how you can use some existing tools to stabilize your video. So a bench, a wall, a rock, what could you rest your elbows on or rest your camera on? It would give you a more stable base to take your video footage. And speaking of movement, if you're going to move the camera at all, like a panning movement, which is left to right, or a tilting movement, which is up and down, move the camera way slower than you think you need to. Our eyes can take in a lot of information at once and can move quickly through a scene, but when you're watching the video footage back on your computer or when you're editing, a lot of times that really fast motion can be too much to process at once and or make us really dizzy if there's a lot of camera movement right after another. All right, how long should your video clips actually be to be usable? Whether you're DIYing it or hiring somebody like me to put together a travel video or home video, it's important to have your clip be long enough that it's actually usable in your video and captures enough of what you need it to, but also not so long that you end up with just a ton of stuff that you don't need, gigabytes upon gigabytes of space taken up on your phone, your computer, and all of that. So here's a rule of thumb that might help. I like to plan for handles of 1 or 2 seconds on the beginning and the end of each clip that I presume are going to get cut off. Now, your hand is shakiest, your camera is shakiest when you're pushing the button to press record or to press stop. So oftentimes that very beginning and very end of the video clip can be a little shaky. So I like to make sure that the important part of what I'm recording is in the middle of the clip and there's a little bit at the beginning and a little bit at the end. It's not that important. At a minimum, count to 5. Just kind of think about the length of an Instagram story, something like that. You especially want to record longer if, like we talked about earlier, you're recording camera movement like a pan or a tilt. I hope these tips were helpful to you to make sure your video clips are usable and fun to watch when you look back on them later. If you need a little help at this point keeping all those video files organized, I've got a video for you on your screen where I'm sharing my exact process for how I keep my media organized and backed up so that I can find it easily later and actually make the most of it.